the Zephyrian research vessel. Analytical Pursuit drifted silently through the void, its crystalline hull reflecting the distant light of Earth's sun. Captain Vexistar adjusted his sensory appendages, reviewing the data streams flowing across his consciousness. After 3 cycles of observation, the blue planet below remained a puzzle wrapped in contradictions. Status report, Science Officer Kethmar, Vextar commanded through bioelectric pulses. Kethmar's chitinous form shifted nervously. Captain, the inhabitants of this world continue to exhibit behaviors that defy logical analysis. Our preliminary scans indicate an advanced civilization capable of space travel, nuclear energy, and complex communication networks. Yet they engage in activities that serve no apparent survival function. Elaborate. The science officer's membrane flickered with confusion. They gather in large groups to observe other members of their species chase a spherical object across a designated area. They voluntarily subject themselves to controlled terror experiences in darkened chambers. Most puzzling of all, they willingly propel themselves from extreme heights using fabric contraptions that could easily malfunction. Vextar's primary brain cluster processed this information. The Zephyrian Empire had encountered 47 sentient species across the galaxy. Each followed predictable patterns: survival, reproduction, resource acquisition, territorial expansion. These humans seemed to waste enormous amounts of energy on incomprehensible activities. Perhaps we should initiate contact, suggested Navigator Yithnal. Direct observation may clarify their behavioral anomalies. Captain Vextar considered this. First contact protocols required extensive preparation, but the Galactic Council's directive was clear. Evaluate species for potential integration into the Empire. These humans possessed technology worth acquiring, despite their puzzling nature. Prepare the diplomatic suite. We'll select a representative sample for preliminary contact. 3 days later, Dr. Sarah Chen was having the worst week of her career. The particle accelerator at CERN had produced readings that made no sense. Her grant application had been rejected, and her coffee maker had broken. She certainly wasn't expecting to be abducted by aliens while walking to her car after another 18-hour day. The beam of light that enveloped her felt warm, almost gentle. When her vision cleared, she found herself standing in a chamber that seemed to be made entirely of living crystal. 3 beings stood before her, each roughly humanoid but clearly not human. Their skin appeared to be a mixture of chitin and flowing liquid mercury, and their eyes were multifaceted like an insect's, but much larger. "Do not be alarmed, human entity," one of them said, though its mouth didn't move. The voice seemed to come from inside her head. "We are representatives of the Zephyrian Empire. I am Captain Vextar. We seek to understand your species." Sarah's scientific mind kicked in, overriding her initial panic. "You can communicate telepathically? We transmit bioelectric patterns. Your neural structure is primitive but compatible. We have questions about your species' behavioral patterns. I'm a physicist, not an anthropologist, but I'll try to help." Captain Vextar gestured to Science Officer Kethmar, who began projecting holographic images into the air between them. Sarah watched scenes of humans engaged in various activities: a football game, people at an amusement park, a rock concert. "Explain the purpose of these activities," Kethmar requested. Sarah looked at the images, then back at the aliens. "Those are recreational activities, entertainment. We do them for fun." The 3 Zephyrians exchanged rapid bioelectric pulses that felt like whispered static in Sarah's mind. "Fun," Captain Vexistar repeated slowly. "Define this concept." "Well, it's enjoyable activities we do when we're not working or taking care of survival needs. Things that make us happy, excited, or help us relax." Kethmar's membrane rippled with what Sarah was beginning to recognize as confusion. "These activities consume resources without producing survival advantages. They appear to serve no logical function." Sarah couldn't help but smile. Not everything has to be logical. Sometimes we do things just because they feel good. Feel good, Navigator Yithnal interjected. Elaborate on this sensation. For the next several hours, Sarah found herself trying to explain concepts that seemed utterly foreign to the Zephyrians. They understood work, reproduction, resource gathering, and technological advancement. But the idea of doing something purely for enjoyment seemed to break their understanding of rational behavior. Show us your recreational facility, Captain Vexitar finally decided. We must observe these fun activities directly. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You want me to take you to an amusement park? If that is where humans engage in fun, then yes. 2 days later, Sarah found herself walking through the gates of Six Flags Magic Mountain with 3 disguised aliens. The Zephyrians had used some kind of holographic technology to make themselves appear human, though they moved with an odd, stilted gait that drew curious looks. The volume of auditory stimulation is excessive, Kethmar observed as they passed a group of teenagers laughing and shouting. That's part of the fun, Sarah explained. The excitement, the energy, the social interaction. They approached the line for a massive roller coaster called Twisted Colossus. The Zephyrians watched in fascination as humans willingly queued up to be strapped into metal cars and hurled around a track at high speeds. They appear to be experiencing terror, Yithnal noted, observing the faces of riders as they screamed through loops and drops. But look at them when they get off, Sarah pointed out. The aliens watched as riders stumbled off the coaster, hair disheveled, faces flushed, many immediately getting back in line. They're smiling, Vextar observed. Their biorhythms indicate elevated stress, but also satisfaction. That's the rush, Sarah said. The thrill. We actually enjoy controlled fear in safe environments. It gives us a natural high from adrenaline and endorphins. The concept seemed to fundamentally confuse the Zephyrians. In their society, fear indicated danger, and danger was to be avoided at all costs. The idea of seeking it out for pleasure was incomprehensible. We must experience this ourselves, Kethmar decided. Sarah looked at them dubiously. Are you sure? Maybe we should start with something gentler, like the carousel. But the aliens were determined to understand. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself sitting next to 3 disguised extraterrestrials as their roller coaster car climbed slowly toward the first drop. I am experiencing elevated stress hormones, Vextar reported clinically. Cardiac rhythm accelerating beyond optimal parameters, Yithnal added. This appears to be a malfunction of safety protocols, Kethmar concluded just as they crested the first hill. What happened next would later be classified in Zephyrian databases as the screaming incident. As the coaster plunged down the first drop, the aliens' carefully maintained human disguises flickered and failed. Their terrified bioelectric pulses created visible static in the air around them. They screamed in harmonics that shattered several windows and sent every cell phone in the park into temporary malfunction. When the ride ended, the 3 Zephyrians sat motionless in their seats, their true forms fully visible, as their holographic projectors had completely failed. Status report, Sarah asked weakly. Systems experiencing total confusion, Vextar managed. Neural pathways have been reorganized. I believe I am malfunctioning, Kethmar added. I wish to experience this again. Yithnal was the first to stand, his legs shaking. The terror was pleasurable? This makes no logical sense. Park security was approaching rapidly, drawn by the technical malfunctions and the sight of 3 very obvious aliens stumbling around their roller coaster. We need to go, Sarah said urgently. But as they hurried toward the park exit, something strange was happening to the Zephyrians. Despite their scientific minds telling them the experience had been illogical and dangerous, they found themselves looking back at the rides with something approaching longing. The sensation was addictive, Vexitar admitted as they reached their concealed transport. We must study this further, Kethmar agreed. As they returned to their ship, the aliens were unusually quiet. For the first time in their long lives, they had experienced something that their logical minds couldn't categorize or understand. The feeling was unsettling, but also exciting. Captain Yethanal finally spoke as they materialized in the ship's transport chamber. I believe we need to revise our understanding of intelligent behavior. Vexitar nodded slowly. Indeed, if these humans have discovered methods of deriving pleasure from fear, stimulation from chaos, and satisfaction from illogical activities, perhaps their apparent inefficiency masks a deeper wisdom. What are your orders, Captain? Kethmar asked. We continue our study. But carefully. This fun appears to be a more dangerous concept than we initially calculated. Unknown to them, their brief exposure to human recreational activities had already begun to change them in ways their logical minds couldn't yet comprehend. The seeds of curiosity, spontaneity, and joy had been planted in minds that had known only logic and duty for millennia. And across the galaxy, the Zephyrian Empire was completely unprepared for what their explorers would bring back to them. Sarah Chen, meanwhile, had the strangest feeling that this was only the beginning. As she watched the alien ship disappear into the night sky, she wondered what other fun activities might completely overwhelm their logical minds. She had no idea that she had just initiated the first phase of what would later be known as the Great Galactic Recreation Revolution. The Zephyrians thought they were studying human irrationality, but they were actually about to discover that sometimes the most logical thing to do is to embrace the illogical. The universe was about to become a much more interesting place. 3 weeks after their return to the mothership, the Zephyrian research team was struggling with unexpected complications. Captain Vexitar found himself staring at holographic recreations of the roller coaster experience, running the sensory data through his consciousness repeatedly. This behavior served no logical purpose, yet he couldn't stop himself. Science Officer Kethamar had begun what he called optimization protocols for their next surface mission, but Navigator Yithnal had observed him sketching designs for improved recreational experiences in his private quarters. Most disturbing of all, Yithnal himself had started timing his duty shifts to coincide with Earth's television broadcasts, which he claimed were for cultural analysis. Captain, Communications Officer Zaltek approached with obvious concern. The Galactic Council is requesting our preliminary report on the human species. They wish to know if integration protocols should be initiated. Vexitar's sensory appendages twitched nervously. How could they explain that their supposedly objective research had become complicated? Tell the Council we require additional study time. The humans present unique characteristics that demand thorough analysis. Sir, with respect, we've been in orbit for nearly 2 Earth months. The Council expects efficiency. The Council expects accuracy, Vexitar corrected sharply. We cannot recommend integration or subjugation protocols without understanding human psychological frameworks completely. After Zalthek departed, Vexitar called an emergency meeting. The 3 primary researchers gathered in the ship's central analysis chamber, their bioluminescent forms casting shifting patterns on the crystalline walls. We must address our current situation, Vexitar began. Our exposure to human recreational activities has produced unexpected psychological effects. Kethmar, report your findings. The science officer's membrane flickered with embarrassment. Captain, I've been experiencing persistent neural patterns related to the amusement park encounter. Specifically, I find myself anticipating similar experiences with what humans might call Excitement. I've been monitoring Earth's entertainment transmissions, Yithnal admitted. The humans have developed incredibly sophisticated methods of creating pleasure through fictional narratives, competitive events, and artistic expression. It's fascinating. Vexitar absorbed this information. I, too, have been affected. I find myself questioning fundamental Zephyrian principles about logical behavior. Perhaps we need more extensive field research to understand why these activities have such powerful effects. Sir, Kethmar interjected, I've identified several other human recreational categories that warrant investigation. They engage in activities called sports, gaming, music festivals, and something called comedy. Each appears to serve different psychological functions. Then we shall study them systematically, Vextar decided. But we must be more cautious. Clearly, these fun activities have properties we underestimated. 3 days later, Dr. Sarah Chen received another telepathic contact while working late in her laboratory. She was beginning to expect these visits, having left instructions with security not to investigate any strange energy readings around her building. Dr. Chen, came the familiar mental voice. We require additional consultation. She looked up to find Vextar materializing in her lab, this time accompanied by what appeared to be a full research team of 6 Zephyrians. You brought friends, Sarah observed, setting down her coffee. We need to study human recreational activities more extensively. Our initial exposure has created complications. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What kind of complications? We appear to be developing an irrational desire to repeat pleasurable experiences, Kethmar explained, stepping forward. This behavior contradicts our logical nature but seems impossible to suppress. Oh, Sarah said, understanding dawning. You're getting addicted to fun. That's actually completely normal. Normal? Yithnal's confusion was evident. You mean all humans experience this? Of course. That's why we have entire industries built around entertainment. Once you discover something you enjoy, you want to do it again. It's basic psychology. The aliens exchanged rapid bioelectric pulses. This suggests fun serves an evolutionary function, Vextar concluded. Perhaps it encourages exploration, learning, or social bonding. Now you're getting it, Sarah agreed. So what do you want to study next? Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself serving as an unofficial guide to human recreation. The Zephyrians approached each new activity with scientific rigor, taking detailed measurements and observations while trying to maintain their emotional objectivity. Their first stop was a professional basketball game. The aliens sat in disguise among thousands of screaming fans, trying to understand why humans became so emotionally invested in the performance of strangers chasing a ball. The participants appear to be engaging in ritualized combat, observed Kethmar, watching as players fought for position under the basket. But notice the cooperation within each group, Yithnal pointed out, and the strategic complexity. This isn't random violence. Look at the audience, Sarah suggested. Watch their faces, their body language. The Zephyrians studied the crowd with growing amazement. Strangers high-fived each other during exciting plays. People painted their faces with team colors. Grown adults screamed themselves hoarse cheering for their chosen side. They're experiencing collective emotion, Vextar realized. Individual consciousness temporarily merging into group identity. Exactly, Sarah said. Sports create artificial tribes. For a few hours, everyone wearing the same colors becomes family. When the home team scored a 3-pointer at the buzzer to win, the arena erupted in collective joy that left the Zephyrians stunned. Thousands of people hugged, cried, and celebrated together as if they had personally achieved victory. This is unprecedented, Kethmar whispered. They derive pleasure from the success of others with whom they have no biological connection. The next experiment was a video game tournament. The aliens watched in fascination as humans competed in virtual environments that served no practical purpose beyond the competition itself. "They're manipulating light patterns on screens," Yethnal observed. "Yet their stress responses indicate this activity is as intense as actual combat." "Virtual reality," Sarah explained. "We've learned to create artificial challenges that trigger our natural competitive instincts. Our brains respond to simulated threats and victories almost like real ones." The Zephyrians watched professional gamers whose reflexes and strategic thinking rivaled their own military specialists, all in service of controlling fictional characters in imaginary worlds. "The skills being developed are genuine," Vextar noted. "Hand-eye coordination, pattern recognition, strategic planning, but applied to scenarios with no real-world consequences." "That's the beauty of games," Sarah said. "You can practice complex skills, experience victory and defeat, learn from mistakes, all without real risk. It's like a training simulator for life." The third experiment nearly broke their understanding entirely. A comedy club. The Zephyrians sat through an evening of stand-up comedy, trying to analyze why humans would voluntarily listen to other humans describe embarrassing or painful experiences. "The performer is recounting personal failures and humiliations," Kethmar noted, bewildered. "Yet the audience responds with pleasure sounds." "That's laughter," Sarah explained. "We find humor in shared experiences, especially when someone can find a funny perspective on universal human struggles." When the comedian told a joke about the awkwardness of first dates, the audience erupted in laughter that resonated with personal recognition. "They're experiencing joy from acknowledging shared vulnerabilities," Yithnal observed. "This appears to strengthen social bonds through admission of weakness." Exactly. Comedy helps us process difficult experiences by finding the absurd or ironic elements. It turns pain into pleasure through perspective. The comedian moved on to observational humor about modern technology, and the Zephyrians watched in amazement as humans laughed at jokes that highlighted the illogical aspects of their own behavior. "They're enjoying criticism of their own species," Vextar realized. "This suggests remarkable psychological flexibility." The final experiment was a music festival. For 3 days, the Zephyrians observed humans gathering to experience organized sound vibrations. They watched people dance to rhythmic patterns, sing along with performers they'd never met, and form temporary communities based on shared musical preferences. "The auditory stimulation appears to synchronize their biorhythms," Kethmar observed as thousands of people swayed to the same beat. "Music bypasses rational thought and directly stimulates emotional centers," Sarah explained. "It's one of our most universal forms of communication." During a particularly energetic rock concert, the aliens watched the crowd transform into a single living organism, moving together, sharing the same emotional highs and lows as the music rose and fell. "They're achieving temporary hive consciousness," Yithnal breathed, "without losing individual identity. And they're doing it voluntarily," Vextar added, "through pleasure rather than force." By the end of their research, the Zephyrians had filled their databases with thousands of hours of observations, but their conclusions were troubling. Every analysis suggested that human recreational activities served crucial psychological and social functions that their own species had never developed. "Captain," Kethmar reported during their final briefing, "our data indicates that human fun activities contribute to psychological resilience, social cohesion, skill development, emotional regulation, and creative problem-solving. Far from being wasteful, these behaviors may be one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages." Elaborate. "Humans who regularly engage in recreational activities show improved performance in all areas of life. They're more adaptable, more creative, better at cooperation, and more resilient in the face of challenges. Fun appears to be a form of distributed training for optimal cognitive and social function." Vextar processed this information with growing unease. You're suggesting that the Zephyrian Empire's emphasis on pure logic and efficiency may actually be suboptimal? The evidence suggests that possibility, sir. The implications were staggering. For millennia, the Zephyrian Empire had prided itself on logical supremacy over emotional species. They had built their civilization on the principle that rational thought was inherently superior to feeling-based decision-making. But what if they had been wrong? What if the humans' seemingly irrational devotion to pleasure and play actually made them stronger, smarter, and more adaptable than the coldly logical Zephyrians? "What do you recommend?" Vexatar asked quietly. "I believe we need to conduct one final experiment," Kethmar said. "We need to introduce recreational activities to our own crew and measure the results. That's highly irregular. Sir, if we're going to understand humanity well enough to make integration recommendations, we need to understand how fun affects Zephyrian psychology. We've already been experiencing changes from our limited exposure. Perhaps we should study those changes systematically." Vextar considered this. The logical part of his mind recoiled at the idea of deliberately introducing chaos into their perfectly ordered ship. But another part of him, a part that had been growing stronger since that first roller coaster ride, whispered that maybe chaos wasn't always a bad thing. "Very well," he decided. "We'll implement a controlled experiment in recreational activity among volunteer crew members, but we proceed carefully." None of them realized they were about to accidentally initiate the most significant cultural revolution in Zephyrian history. The empire that had conquered half the galaxy through superior logic was about to discover that sometimes the most logical thing to do is to stop being logical. And somewhere in her laboratory on Earth, Dr. Sarah Chen was beginning to suspect that her alien friends were about to turn their entire civilization upside down in the name of scientific research. The analytical pursuit had been transformed. What was once a sterile research vessel now hummed with unprecedented activity as Captain Vextar's recreational experiments spread throughout the ship like a beneficial virus. The transformation had begun small, with volunteer crew members participating in structured fun activities for scientific observation. It had quickly spiraled into something none of them could have predicted. Communications Officer Zalthek had discovered human puzzle games and had spent the last week constructing increasingly complex, three-dimensional challenges that other crew members now competed to solve. Engineering teams had begun incorporating artistic elements into their technical designs, claiming that aesthetic considerations somehow improved functionality. Most remarkably, the ship's efficiency ratings had actually increased by 12%. "Captain," Science Officer Kethmar reported, his membrane displaying patterns that hadn't existed in Zephyrian physiology before their contact with humans. "The results of our recreational integration experiment are unprecedented." Vexatar gestured for him to continue while trying to hide his own recent acquisition. A collection of Earth music that he claimed was for research, but had been listening to during his off-duty periods. Crew members participating in fun activities show improved problem-solving capabilities, enhanced creativity indexes, better interpersonal cooperation, and reduced stress markers. Most significantly, they demonstrate increased adaptability when facing unexpected challenges. And the psychological effects? Positive across all metrics. Participants report increased life satisfaction, stronger social bonds with crewmates, and enhanced motivation for both recreational and professional activities. Navigator Yithnal approached, carrying what appeared to be a primitive stringed instrument he had constructed from ship materials. "Captain, we've received a priority communication from the Galactic Council. They're demanding our immediate report on human integration potential." Vextar's primary consciousness cluster processed this information with growing anxiety. How could they explain to the rigid hierarchy of the Zephyrian Empire that their research had led them to question fundamental assumptions about optimal behavior? There's something else, Kethmar added quietly. Word of our experiments has spread to other ships in the fleet. We're receiving requests for transfer from crew members who want to experience these recreational activities. And several Admiralty-level officials have expressed concern about our extended mission duration, Yithnal continued. Before Vextar could respond, his personal communicator activated with the unmistakable bioelectric signature of Admiral Thexnor, one of the most powerful figures in the Zephyrian military hierarchy. Captain Vextar, came the cold, perfectly logical transmission. You will report to the command vessel immediately for debriefing. Your research period has exceeded acceptable parameters. Understood, Admiral. We'll prepare our findings for presentation. Negative. You will report alone and immediately. Your crew will remain on station pending evaluation. The transmission ended, leaving an ominous silence in the command chamber. Sir, Kethmar said carefully, I don't believe the Admiral will be receptive to our conclusions about recreational activities. No, Vextar agreed. I don't believe he will. 4 hours later, Captain Vextar materialized in the pristine command chamber of the battlecruiser Logical Supremacy. The ship was a monument to Zephyrian engineering efficiency, with every surface optimized for function and every system running at peak logical performance. After weeks on his increasingly chaotic research vessel, the sterile perfection felt strangely oppressive. Admiral Thexnor stood before a holographic display showing the positions of the entire Earth observation fleet. His ancient form radiated the cold authority of pure logical thought, unmarked by any trace of emotional contamination. Captain, he began without preamble, your mission was to evaluate human integration potential and recommend appropriate action. Your extended timeline suggests either incompetence or contamination. Which is it? Neither, Admiral. The human species presents complexities that require thorough analysis. Explain these complexities. Vextar chose his words carefully. Humans possess psychological and social capabilities that don't fit our standard evaluation criteria. Their recreational behaviors, initially dismissed as wasteful, appear to serve crucial adaptive functions. Admiral Thexnor's bioelectric field flickered with disapproval. Recreation is inefficiency. Time and resources diverted from productive activity toward pleasurable stimulation. Civilizations that prioritize pleasure over purpose inevitably collapse. Respectfully, Admiral, our research suggests otherwise. Human recreational activities enhance rather than diminish their overall capabilities. Impossible. Provide your data. For the next 3 hours, Vextar presented their findings. He showed brain scans demonstrating improved neural flexibility in humans who regularly engaged in fun activities. He presented social cohesion statistics, proving that recreational bonds strengthened rather than weakened human communities. He offered creativity metrics showing that play enhanced rather than distracted from serious work. With each piece of evidence, Admiral Thexnor's disapproval deepened. Captain, the Admiral finally interrupted, you appear to have been psychologically compromised by extended exposure to irrational behavior patterns. These humans have infected you with their illogical tendencies. Sir, with respect, calling the behavior illogical doesn't negate its effectiveness. Effectiveness? Admiral Thexnor's form flared with cold anger. Examine the galactic power structure, Captain. The Zephyrian Empire controls 47 star systems through superior logic and military precision. The Krelian Federation manages 32 systems through technological supremacy. The Vorthak Collective maintains 28 systems through perfect economic efficiency. Meanwhile, these humans haven't even achieved faster-than-light travel. But they've achieved something else, Admiral. Something we may have overlooked in our pursuit of galactic dominance. And what is that? Happiness. The word hung in the sterile air like a foreign substance. Admiral Thexnor stared at Vextar as if he had suddenly sprouted additional appendages. Happiness is irrelevant. Survival, expansion, and logical supremacy are the only measures of civilizational success. Are they? Vextar found himself asking. When was the last time any Zephyrian expressed satisfaction with their existence? When did any of us experience joy in our achievements? We've built the most logically perfect civilization in the galaxy, but have we built one worth living in? Captain Vextar, you are relieved of command. You will be transported to the medical vessel for psychological rehabilitation. Your research team will be reassigned and your findings classified. Admiral, I strongly recommend you review our data before making any decisions about Earth. I've already made my decision. Humanity represents a contamination vector for logical thinking. They will be quarantined until such time as their recreational impulses can be safely suppressed. Integration is impossible. But as Admiral Thexnor spoke those words, neither he nor Vextar was aware of what was happening throughout the Zephyrian fleet. Word of the recreational experiments had indeed spread, but not in the way anyone expected. On 17 different ships, crew members had begun their own underground experiments with fun. Engineering teams were secretly competing to design the most elegant solutions to technical problems. Navigation crews had started collaborative storytelling during long-range scans. Even military units had begun developing strategic exercises that resembled human games more than traditional drills. The results were becoming impossible to ignore. Ship efficiency was rising. Intercrew cooperation had reached unprecedented levels. Problem-solving capabilities were expanding exponentially. And most concerning of all to the rigid command structure, crew members were beginning to question orders that seemed to serve no logical purpose beyond maintaining hierarchy. Dr. Sarah Chen knew none of this as she worked late in her laboratory, but she sensed something significant was happening. The aliens had been gone for over a week, and their absence felt different this time, more final somehow. She was surprised when her laboratory filled with the familiar blue light of Zephyrian transport technology, but even more surprised when not one, but dozens of aliens materialized around her. Dr. Chen, came a familiar mental voice, but it carried overtones of urgency she hadn't heard before. Vextar? What's going on? And why are there so many of you? We have a situation. My superiors have decided that human recreational activities represent a dangerous contamination of logical thinking. They plan to quarantine your species. Quarantine? What does that mean? Isolation. Prevention of cultural contact with other galactic civilizations. Eventual suppression of recreational activities through technological intervention. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They want to take away our fun? They view it as a necessary measure to prevent the spread of illogical behavior patterns. But that's insane, Sarah protested. Fun isn't a disease. It's one of the best parts of being human. We agree, came another voice. Sarah turned to see Science Officer Kethmar step forward. Which is why we've come to you for advice. What kind of advice? How to stage a revolution. Sarah stared at them. You want to rebel against your own government? Because of fun? Because of what fun represents, Vextar corrected. Freedom to choose our own experiences, the right to find joy in existence, the possibility of growth beyond pure logical efficiency. Our preliminary experiments have spread throughout the fleet, Kethmar explained. Hundreds of crew members have experienced recreational activities. They're refusing to give up these experiences, even under direct orders. The command structure doesn't understand that we're not becoming less capable, added Yithnal. We're becoming more capable in ways they can't measure. Sarah looked around at the group of aliens who had traveled across the galaxy to discover the concept of fun, only to find themselves risking everything to preserve it. What do you need from me? Help us prove that recreational activities don't weaken civilizations, Vextar said. Show us how to demonstrate that fun makes societies stronger, not weaker. And maybe, Kethmar added hesitantly, Teach us some more games. For purely research purposes, of course. Sarah couldn't help but smile. I think I can do both of those things. What happened next would later be recorded in galactic history as the Great Recreation Revolution. Working together, humans and progressive Zephyrians developed a comprehensive demonstration of recreational benefits that couldn't be ignored even by the most rigid logical minds. They organized inter-ship competitions that showcased improved problem-solving skills. They created collaborative art projects that demonstrated enhanced creativity. They established cultural exchange programs that proved recreational activities strengthened rather than weakened social bonds. Most importantly, they documented everything with the kind of rigorous scientific methodology that even Admiral Thexnor couldn't dismiss. The revolution wasn't violent. It was joyful, and that perhaps was what made it impossible to stop. When Zephyrian crew members who had experienced fun were ordered to return to pure logical behavior, they simply asked, why? When they were told that logic was superior to emotion, they asked for evidence. When they were commanded to suppress their newfound creativity, they responded by creating even more beautiful and functional designs. The Empire's rigid hierarchy found itself facing something it had never encountered before. Logical beings who had learned to question the logic of their own system. Admiral Thexnor tried to maintain order, but how do you suppress a revolution based on joy? How do you punish people for being more effective, more creative, and more cooperative than they've ever been before? The answer, it turned out, was that you couldn't. Not without becoming the very thing the Zephyrian Empire claimed to oppose. An irrational system that prioritized control over optimal outcomes. Within 6 months, recreational activities had become not just accepted, but actively encouraged throughout the Zephyrian fleet. Ship performance reached levels that pure logic had never achieved. Crew satisfaction soared beyond anything in their recorded history. And for the first time in millennia, Zephyrians began to look forward to their daily experiences rather than simply enduring them. The Galactic Council, initially horrified by these developments, found themselves forced to acknowledge the empirical evidence. Civilizations that incorporated recreational activities were simply more successful than those that didn't. Admiral Thexnor himself, after being required to participate in a mandatory fun activity designed by his own crew, experienced something unprecedented. He laughed. And once he understood what laughter meant, he began to question everything he thought he knew about optimal behavior. Dr. Sarah Chen, meanwhile, found herself appointed as the galaxy's first professor of recreational sciences, tasked with helping other species discover their own versions of fun. It wasn't the career path she had planned, but she couldn't imagine anything more important. As she often told her first class of interspecies students, the universe is vast and full of wonders. But the greatest wonder of all is learning to enjoy the journey. The Zephyrian Empire had set out to conquer human civilization through superior logic. Instead, they discovered that the most logical thing they could do was learn to be illogical. And across the galaxy, in countless species and countless worlds, the revolution of joy had only just begun.